From Mississippi to New Orleans.
Yeah, put those down. Right on my toes.
From Mississippi to New Orleans to Weezy.
Not since the presidential election of 1980 has Siskiyou County had such a high voter turnout. 69.7% of all registered voters went to the polls, with Byrd gaining 60% of the vote and Sheriff's Department Captain Ken Jordan tallying 39%.
What we're looking at here in this county, or in this room tonight, is a spectrum of Siskiyou County. And one individual has brought us all together tonight. And that is the individual who's going to be the next sheriff of this county, Charlie Byrd.
Oh, no problem. This is something that not very many people get to see. Well, this is my brother Charlie. My brother was not really a talkative type of person.
My uncle's voice is like something that like is rumbling, and then you hear it and you have to like, okay, what did he say? Okay, that's what he said.
Well, Charlie was a very large man. You know, he was a big, powerful man. If anybody ever met him, you'd never forget him.
If you didn't understand how my family grew up speaking, you would have no idea what he said. And that's just kind of how it was, having like a mix of like Southern lineage in your dialect.
Charles, I wouldn't say he was a man that was ever in great shape. But back then I don't think you really, they didn't worry about shape.
What you gonna do?
He said, hey, come here, I want to talk to you.
First, you'd be kind of afraid of him, but then once you met him, he was, no matter who you were in this county, he was your friend for life.
Now I'd like to spend a few minutes talking with Charlie Byrd. I'm very excited to have him on our show as our special guest, and let's meet him at this time. Hi, Charlie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Charlie, I have known you a little bit throughout the last year or two, but I really don't know really a lot about you and what you're successful at and a little bit of your past. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got into law enforcement and how long you've been in it and that type of thing?
I was born and raised in Weed, went to the Weed school system. My parents came from Louisiana, Mississippi, and they worked in the mill.
When you're growing up, a lot of times you wonder why someone moved different places, and people don't really, your family, they don't really tell you the whole story. And so some things you have to find out later in life. My uncle left Mississippi, I believe it was around 1926. And the reason why he left, he had two brothers that were lynched. And Longbell actually, who actually ended up buying the mill here, was actually back there. And so they started recruiting the mill workers and asking them to come to California. And so I think what they did was they loaned them money to take the train to come from Louisiana. So that's when the population started moving from the Louisiana, Mississippi to California, especially into Weed. So I've read reports of so at one point there might have been over 3,000 blacks in Weed. So what they did was they brought you here and they said, oh, you can live in this area over here. And then they gave the streets all Southern names: Mississippi Street, Louisiana Street, Georgia Street, Texas Street. And so they created this black community that was based on the South and thought, well, we all like it. Everybody wants to be living in a street called Georgia or Mississippi or Texas or whatever like this. So finally, when they started doing the protests here in the 60s, they finally changed the names of the streets.
There weren't really that many difficulties growing up in Weed. And I'm talking about racial issues. I think it has to do with the size of Weed, because Weed has one elementary school and one high school. So we all congregated, we all went to the same school, so we all got to know each other. And when we played sports, it was just boys on the basketball team, boys on the football team, vice versa. So we really didn't get too concerned about race. And I remember when the civil rights movement came around in the early 60s, you know, we had CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, come to town, and we had Black Panthers come to town. And then it was like somebody pulled back a layer and said, well, there are things that are going on here, but we didn't really notice it because it was conditioned. It was just life. I mean, I was an adult before I realized that the door that we went into the Weed Mercantile, which was called the company store, the door we used to go into went right into the grocery department. I just assumed that we went into that door because we went to the grocery store. I did not know that blacks were prohibited from coming in the front door, and we were told to go in by that door.
Here you were living in Mississippi. You come to California. You left Mississippi because of racism. Blatant racism, and all of a sudden now you come to California for a better life, and they were paying, I think they were getting like 71 cents an hour. It wasn't that much, but it was better than what they were getting in the South, and having to go pick cotton or maybe work 2 or 3 jobs and make a living. You know, you came here and all of a sudden you're told that you can only live certain places. You're told that you can't shop in certain areas, and so a lot of people, I believe, you know, decided that maybe that wasn't what they wanted in life. When you come out of Weed, there's Hoy Road, and we were growing up, we called it Crime Hill, and we go hang out there. The story used to be a lot of crimes were committed up on Crime Hill, and I think they had to do with boys meeting girls.
You know, the way I got into law enforcement, I started college to become an engineer, and I changed my mind. I got thrown in jail one night and saw the light.
And then you have worked your way up through the Weed Police Department, and I believe you became the police chief.
Yes, I started out as a reserve, became patrolman in 1968, was promoted to sergeant in 1971.
When Charlie was promoted from sergeant to chief of police, I got called into the city manager's office along with Charlie. And I could tell by Charlie's body language that the conversation wasn't going to be pleasing. What I was going to hear was not going to be acceptable to me. But I was told by the city manager that you're supposed to be you're supposed to be our next sergeant, because the way it works is seniority. And I was a senior patrolman at that point. And if Charlie moved to chief, then I was supposed to move to sergeant. But it was explained to me that you can't have that job because Charlie is now going to be the chief. He's black, and you would be the sergeant, and you're black, and we'd have 2 black people in charge of the police department. But you can't forgive what somebody else has done or said to you or about you that you perceive was wrong. Amen. But you want God to forgive you, your transgressions, your sins, your shortcomings, but you're not willing to do that for somebody else. I'm just talking about cargo that you can carry. Lighten your load, throw it away, cast it.
In Lincoln Heights, they had 2 areas. They had the Highway 97 splits the community up into, so we call it across the road. You're not supposed to cross the road.
Back in our day, they used to have a little rivalry against that side of the street against our side of the street, which was the opposite side of Highway 97.
To this day, I'm very surprised that it hasn't been a lot more death, because when you go across Highway 97 and stuff like that, they don't slow down.
I lived on Wakefield, and we sat on our porch. We just kind of did our hands like this because everybody waved. And we waved at everybody no matter if we knew them or not.
When you're in a small community like Weed, a lot of people, especially downtown and businesses, they want you to stop, get out of the police car and come in and visit with them. I mean, Weed was probably doing community policing before community policing was a statewide concept.
They were chauffeur people home. They knew they were drunk or whatever. You leave your car here. You're not driving it. I'm gonna take you home. That's how, or let so-and-so drive your car and I'm gonna follow you guys and make sure you guys make it home safe. So that's the type of neighborhood, that's the type of city that we live in.
But Weed was famous for one thing. Weed had one of the first drive-bys right out here, Highway 97. A couple of guys drove by 97 one day and shot up all the homes on the front street here. And we subsequently made an arrest in the case, and it was basically somebody didn't like the black people and decided, let's go shoot up all the homes. And they did it by driving down 97.
Probably about 1970, whenever a black home used to come up for sale, it would usually be purchased by another black person. In the 80s, there were no more blacks that were living here because there was a lack of jobs, so people were moving away. So then you saw the influx of people of other colors moving into the neighborhood.
Weed Police Chief Charlie Byrd becomes the early bird and announces his candidacy, becoming the first contender of an ultimate field of 6 county residents vying for the top law enforcement position.
Because a lot of people went up against him, and a lot of people didn't think he was going to win it, but he did.
The community, the black community, and plus the whole community of Weed really supported him.
And I don't care what color you are, if people feel you're the best candidate, you're probably going to win in America in 1986.
Well, in Siskiyou County, Weed Police Chief Charlie Byrd was elected Siskiyou County Sheriff, beating Kenneth Jordan.
The Sheriff of Siskiyou County, Charlie Byrd.
November 4th, 1986, Election Day. Chief Byrd becomes Sheriff-elect Byrd and is the first black elected sheriff in California state history.
We were just so proud, like, hey, we got the first black sheriff. That's pretty good. That's pretty in Weed, of all places. You know, for you to read that in a jet, that's almost just, to back in that time, it was almost just like Obama. To put it in perspective, because you just didn't see that. You just didn't see something like that happen.
Throughout his 14th-month campaign, Byrd refused to let race become an issue and frequently diffused any chance of it.
I'm proud to have been selected by the citizens of this county to serve as their next sheriff. I don't think the race has anything to do with it, as far as I'm concerned personally.
In order to get that job, you have to have the approval of the population, which means Charlie just didn't have the approval or wasn't just liked by the community of Weed, he was liked by the people of Siskiyou County. You realize this man has a good heart and a caring nature, and I think that's what got him elected. People could see that he was, quote unquote, the real deal, and he cared about this community. He cared about this county.
Byrd's supporters expressed their surprise that the racial issues did not become a factor in what they perceived in part as a redneck county.
I'm talking about the people in Wairika, the good old, you want to call them the good old boys. They stood behind Charles Byrd.
Why?
I guess because of just the person that he was. They voted him in there. I'm talking the county voted him in there.
If he met you one time anywhere in the county, and then 5 years later, you've seen him again, he'd remember your name, and I just never could figure out, how he did that. It was awesome.
Well, I think that you need to know people, and that comes in a lot of different ways. It comes from textbooks. It comes from being exposed to other law enforcement. Hindsight's always 20/20, so you learn that from other agencies or other officers. For example, I have 57 other sheriffs in the state, and I'm not beyond getting on the telephone and calling them and saying, hey, I got this problem, what do you think?
His persona was statewide. You can go anywhere in the state of California, and they knew Charlie.
Back in those days, there was only, on the local government side, there was only 2 paid positions in local government in Siskiyou County. It was me for the city of Weed and Joe Spini for the city of Mount Shasta. So Charlie used his pay staffs to do a couple really big things for the county. At that time, there was just 2 Jaws of Life in Siskiyou County. Well, he had his grant writer apply for traffic safety and got Jaws of Life in all the communities in Siskiyou County. That's when they added, all their kind of professional groups, the Siskiyou County Arson Team, their bomb squad. So he really brought them into the 20th century, the Sheriff's Department. I started the fire academy program at the College of the Siskiyous. And at that time we had no facilities, so it made the job of training firefighters really difficult. We wrote a grant to kick off our facilities at the college, and we were super stoked about it, because it was going to be that first key that started what you see now at the college. And then all of a sudden we get this phone call, Karen does, from the state going, hey, we're sorry we messed up. We shouldn't have awarded you that grant. So you can use it, but you just can't build your drill tower, which is what we really needed. And so anyways, I called Charlie Bird up and I said, hey, Charlie, I got an issue. Maybe you can help me out with this, And so he says, well, I'll meet you down at the college. And so he comes on down there and I explained to him, the issue we had. And he says, oh, let me see what I can do. And in those days, you had those old bag cell phones, and he has one inside his sheriff's vehicle and goes under and he dials a number on there and he answers, he goes, hey, Gray. Well, he's talking to Gray Davis, by the first name, that's how powerful Charlie was in those days, and he goes, I got this issue, I wonder if you can help me out with it. So he explains it by first name, to the governor, calls him direct, and then like 3 days later, we get a call from the Economic Development Problem, said, hey, your grant's not a problem, you'll be able to do with it what you want to do with it. So, to this day, that's why we have those facilities, that kind of kicked off everything else, It really made that program as good as anywhere in the state, and because of Charlie Bird.
I've always been one for serving people, and if you think about it as starting out as a Boy Scout or a Cub Scout, you're there to perform a service for the public, for the people. There's rewards to that, and my reward is being able to make a difference for the people I serve. And that's the way I describe it. If I can just make some impact for law enforcement in Siskiyou County or in the state of California, then I'm happy.
Talk about Charles. Charles was probably, I think he had a lot on his seat. Being the sheriff of Siskiyou County and being part of the Black community, anything that would go wrong with a person, they would always come to Charles and talk to him and saying, Charles, can you get my son off, or can you help him? And when he couldn't do that, I think a lot of people would get pissed off at him and you would turn, would kind of dislike him because of that. And I think that was a big burden on Charles, because, you can only do so much, and stuff. And I think a lot of people held that against him sometimes.
I do remember that there was a campaign once upon a time to discredit him. There were those that didn't want him as sheriff, and they did a couple of things to quote unquote to try to set him up to tarnish his character. And I remember one incident, he'd been fishing, and he was going home with his boat and fishing gear. And if you've ever seen Charlie when he's not dressed in the uniform, he wouldn't look like a policeman. He would just dress like a normal person. And he got stopped for something, and it turned into a big deal that when they searched his car, he had an open container of alcohol in his car, and it was simple. I was fishing, and I had a drink as I was fishing, and but it became a big public deal, and it was all orchestrated to discredit him. But he was successful in winning that campaign because he had the support of the people.
I became good friends with Charlie, and so we started hunting together. We were going to the spot that we hadn't been to before in Idaho. You got to remember during that era too, Idaho is white America. And some of that was it was a real eye-opener for me, because we would take 2 pickups from Weed here and we'd head to Idaho hunting, and we went, 4 or 5 years back to Idaho, and me and Charlie would get pulled over like twice, going and then twice coming back, because of him being African American. And those officers, to just see it on their face, how they're so surprised to find out, that he's not just the deputy sheriff, he's the sheriff. But, it was kind of an eye-opener to me, what they had to deal with, people had to deal with in those ages, if they were driving, long distance, which was really sad.
I don't ever remember being angry. I remember knowing there's a difference and just knowing the hypocrisy that you'd see. For example, riding the school bus. I don't ever remember anybody sitting next to me in the school bus. And so, little things like that, you wonder about it. And then I go to the South, and when I go to visit my grandparents and my uncles in the South, I'd see they were going to an all-black school. And I'm saying, well, I'm going to a school that's mixed. And so everything says everything's okay. But I never, ever was invited to a birthday party, a Christmas party, a graduation. And sometimes you think back and you go, well, that's probably okay, because I really don't want to be with them anyway.
It really takes like the connection to break those things up. Because when you're having sleepovers with like kids who I would now call their dads, like, racist rednecks, their dads still invited, Mexican kids, black kids, white kids to have sleepovers and play GoldenEye for, 6 hours into the wee morning. And so I can't say completely that like everybody in Siskiyou County wasn't open to like diversity, but I don't know where it fractured. It just felt like people got super okay with being racist out loud when I was like 17. So
it's a lot better to get in and solve the problems within the neighborhoods before they happen than to wait for things to brew and get all stirred up, then go and try to solve the problem. So I believe if you're involved with the poor people, you're involved with the minorities or whatever, and recognize those problems and work to solve those problems, then life becomes a lot easier.
My journey of like self-discovery was kind of thrown off course by these big like revelations that, oh, your parents weren't supposed to be married because my dad is black and my mom is white. They lied about living together. They had separate phones within an apartment so that if my dad's mom called or if my mom's dad called, they couldn't speak to each other on accident. They worked at the same place but didn't share that they dated. This is all one generation. The weird thing about now is we've almost gotten pushback about provisioning for diversity inclusions to where like the complaint I hear now is that like I didn't get hired because you got hired because you're black. And I've heard that, which is crazy. Because now it's like I went to college and got financing to have an opportunity that wasn't afforded. And already within my generation, there's pushback about me being in the workplace because I was afforded an opportunity to go to college. Like, people are already ready to unwind putting the opportunity out there for people like myself to go to college within one generation when my parents weren't allowed to get married. And that alone, like, if you know that somebody out there wasn't supposed to be a child in their grandparents' eyes and isn't supposed to be working in their peers' eyes, it's crazy. Like, it's hard to talk about, obviously.
Well, you always had to keep it down because you never know what you was gonna get, because you always get the second thought, you started and stuff like that. So I think pretty much in those days that we all handled it in a very, civil manner, and stuff like that. Sometimes your temperature, you lose control every once in a while.
54-year-old Sheriff Charlie Bird was escorted off a San Francisco-bound SkyWest flight this morning when a female passenger and her daughter complained that they were uncomfortable with Bird on board. Prior to boarding Flight 6547, Bird reported he felt singled out by a security officer at the Redding Airport and loudly accused security of stalking him, as well as treating him differently than other passengers.
He did something down in the Redding Airport and he got into it with somebody and he kind of cussed them out or something like that. Because like I said, when Charles got mad, he would get mad.
Because I just think he was all about doing things right. And if you're not doing things right, he was going to tell you about it.
Yeah, well, let's see. So that'd be 86 to 2002. So he was 4 terms. So Charlie was running for his 5th term. Certainly, I was helping him with the election. I was hoping he'd get reelected.
After he lost his election, he decided he retired.
And it's sad because this is a Sid Riley thing, that when he was no longer sheriff, when he was no longer in law enforcement, I think that began his demise, because that's what the man was geared for. That's what he had devoted his life to, and he didn't have that job anymore. And I think that's when he started having health issues, and he eventually succumbed to those health issues.
And really, you know, for Charlie, his whole life was his career, you know. So, you know, I kind of think he just was heartbroken. That's why he passed away in 2003.
I don't believe in wasting a lot of negative energy that can be expended on positive things.
Something you can get something positive done.
That's right. I mean, so why be negative? You can do one thing to make a difference and make the world a better place to live, and I'm for it. I really feel that way about Siskiyou County.
When Charlie passed, my Uncle Charlie passed, that funeral was completely different than any funeral I'd ever seen in my life. It wasn't until after he passed that I really started finding out like how much he had accomplished as a black man within law enforcement.
But you talk to anybody in the community, white or black, Hispanics, Italians, Greeks, or whatever, about Charlie, I think they found that Charlie was a fair person.
A policeman, according to the laws of the state of California, is not called a cop. The laws of California call a police officer a peace officer, which means we're supposed to bring peace to whatever situation that we're involved in. And when you think about a religious background and the tools of law enforcement, if you don't care about people, then you're not going to be a very good policeman, are you?
Look among yourselves here in this community. There might be a park, there might be a street, there may be something. We need to continue the tribute to Charlie Byrd.
I think his legacy, the man will live on and on and on, because there are certain attributes of others that we meet, that we inherit or take, and we pass those on. And I think he's being passed on.
Long live his fame and long live his glory, and long may his story be told. As a youngster in Weed, he exceeded the speed. The result was a night spent in jail. He liked it so much that he still stays in touch. In fact, that's where he picks up his mail. Charlie Byrd, brave, courageous, and bold. Long live his fame and long live his glory, and long may his story be told. I gotta check the words out here. Born in this county and raised in this county, police chief since 75. And now I ain't joking, he better stop smoking, or next year he won't be alive.
Tonight we've learned that 2 people have died in the mill fire. Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office says that the victims' bodies were found inside a burned building in the town of Weed. The mill fire has burned over 4,000 acres. It's now 25% contained as firefighters continue to battle the flames.
We lost our home yesterday. The fire started raging. We lost our whole neighborhood. And we live over in Lincoln Heights, which is probably one of the oldest black neighborhoods in northern section of California, you know, probably from Redding on. Well, we probably can't see it, but the fire was back over here.
Shed 17's on fire. So the mill, when they built the new boiler, which was in the 90s, when Mr. Ford built the new boiler, they take that creates ash, so they put a big concrete bin inside that shed 17 and to store that ash in. Unfortunately, last year that ash caught the building on fire. It had caught it on fire before, but the sprinkler system had always caught it. But this time the sprinkler system didn't check it. That building was slated for demolition last year too, so it was just one of those really unfortunate bad deals. The mill was gonna get rid of that old building last year. They had already awarded a bid, and the ash caught the building on fire, and then it burnt down Lincoln Heights, and it was horrible. And well, it burnt that entire building down in less than 5 minutes. So it was in that community. They were running for their lives, unfortunately. It happened so quickly.
Who lets a company do that? Who lets a company put ash in a 100-year-old building? And I feel that they just put a ticking time bomb in our neighborhood.
We have this big south wind and weed, and that's why this town was built here. Abner Weed built weed before the invention of dryers. They have the dryer technology now at the mills, but before that, they used air drying for their wood. So that's why the town's here, but that's also why we've had 3 major fires in the last 10 years, is that south wind also dries out our vegetation, and when a big fire gets going, it's extremely hard to stop until the wind stops blowing.
So all those houses over there were bought and were all generational homes. That's what makes it real hard, because you can't get that back. We can build these beautiful homes, but you're not going to get that, that part of the generations.
The fires opened up a lot of what was going on behind the scenes with property ownership in the Black community, and a lot of Black people are going to lose their homes. The banks are going to take them, or somebody's going to come in with Bay Area money and think, oh, this is a nice view of the mountain, snatch it up. And my dad put himself in a position to own property multiple times over. If anybody can learn to understand the importance of it, it's once it's gone, it's gone. You can't get it back. My grandma's house is gone.
If you think about the oppression that the Black race and minority races have endured for hundreds of years, you don't let the hatred, the bigotry, all of these issues stop you. If it does anything for you, it firms you up. It firms up your perseverance. It's you know what? You have a mindset that this too will pass. A lot of things happen in minority communities, and people just go, you know what? We'll just bind together and we'll just rebuild. That's it. Because we've seen that type of devastation. We've seen things that destroyed our neighborhood before, but what do? We unify and we become stronger. That's my definition of resilience. It's ingrained in you. It goes back to that theory of where you were when. What you went through when makes you who you are now.
Well, this was after he died, though, but because his brother lived in that house out there. And so they had a party out there, and we heard this noise, upstairs, and everybody's like, ooh, Charles Byrd is telling us to get out of his house. And we always, because it was just the weirdest thing. It was just out of nowhere. It was just this weird sound. And everybody's like, man, Charles is telling us to get out of his house. But I don't know, he wasn't doing that, but...
Did you?
No, we didn't. We just kept on partying. All right, Charles, we're going to continue on. That's why.